Thank you for tuning into our podcast, Canal Days, what life was like in the industrial Connecticut River Valley of Massachusetts. I am your host, Carrie, and joining us today is Holyoke's very own local historian and creator of the historical tours of Greater Holyoke, Robert Cumlin. He personally offers and leads public and private tours, as well as presentations of historical sites within communities throughout the state of Massachusetts. Currently, the communities he has chosen to focus on this year are Holyoke, Chicopee, South Hadley, and East Hampton, and also Granby and Amherst as well. His tours spotlight on the local canals, reservoirs, cemeteries, and churches, as well as various parks, streets, and selected historical houses within each community. In today's episode, we will be discussing the homes of Emily and Austin Dickinson, also known as the Homestead and Evergreen Museums in Amherst. So what is the history of the Homestead and Evergreen in Amherst?
In 1813, the Dickinson family had built their home called the Homestead. It's a gorgeous place. Her father was a lawyer. Her grandfather was a merchant in Amherst. Her father also was a state rep in the state legislation. And he was a very good lawyer, so he got a lot of money. The home being built in 1813 at that location, there wasn't much else around, so he had a big lawn, definitely. And it's known now that we're reading the letters that Emily liked to garden both behind her house and then behind her brother's house that would be built. Now in 1856, her brother had built the Evergreen because he had gotten married to his wife Susan, and they were going to raise 3 kids. And it was only built about 200 feet away from the homestead itself. So you had 2 gorgeous homes, and the neighborhood was getting a lot more homes across the street. Would get a beautiful church across the street also. And so this was and still is a gorgeous place. Now, today we're going to talk about, sure, the homestead as a house, and then the grounds of both. And we're also going to talk about Emily's poems and letters and diary. The first 2 of which lots of them still exist.
And what is particularly special about the homestead?
All right, now, remember that Emily Dickinson is born there and lived a vast majority of her life there. Maybe 1 year she lived in South Hadley, Amherst College. Otherwise, she wrote all her poems there and wrote all her letters. And what's really special now is that it's now a National Historic Landmark, and there's only about 3,000 such structures around the United States that have that designation. And so it's nationally known and internationally known just as she is. So it has lots of visitors both on the outside and the inside. And many of her letters have been read recently, and people are getting a better view of what she really was like and what she enjoyed in life. And that included going outside more than you may think.
And really quick, before we continue with the rest of our interview, just to fill our listeners in, to sign up for any of his various tours or find out more information, you can check out his website at holyokecanaltour.org. And there you can find videos and podcasts of the stops along each of his tours, as well as photos and text of the historical sites throughout as well. And for private tours and other inquiries, you can email him directly at bobcat4214B@yahoo.com. And his tours make for fun, educational, outdoor activities for families and group parties. So getting back to our interview, what are the grounds, landscape alike around the Homestead and Evergreen?
They're quite gorgeous, of course, and they're connected yards, and they're now both under the control of Amherst College, which is wonderful, so they can rehab the homes back to what they looked like originally, inside and outside. They can also make the grounds look like what they did originally. It's now known that Emily Dickinson was quite the gardener of mostly flowers. And people are trying to reconstruct what the garden must have looked like. Through her detailed letters, they're getting a good idea of what must have been around there. They're trying to sculpt the area, the land, the way she had it, and then try to get the flowers going. Now, it wasn't just her house had flowers. She had flowers not only around the homestead, but also around the Evergreen. And through the letters, it found that she babysat her nephews and nieces quite a bit next door, and also tended the grounds and put flower gardens into that house also. So they're going to try to recreate that garden too, which would be spectacular. It's getting back to a point in her life where she was at her prime. She was born in 1830, and she died 1886. So somewhere along the line, they're going to try to choose a point in the prime of her career and figure out what it looked like.
And where are Emily Dickinson's poems and letters kept now?
The vast majority of them are kept either in special collections at Amherst College, which has the largest repository of poems of hers. Remember, she wrote about 1,500 poems. Amherst College has about 830 of those poems. Some are fragments. Some are written on envelopes that were not used. Some are written on envelopes that had been used and never sent. And some are written on envelopes that were sent. Incredible. And some were written on the back of food wrappers, bags. But most were put onto regular paper. And most of her poems still exist. It's not known. We don't publish a poem. It's not known if that poem is a fragment or a complete one. So it's very difficult. Now, the letters, Amherst College also has the largest repository of Emily Dickinson's letters. Remember, you send letters out, so they had to get or obtain by purchase all of the letters they would end up having. They have 350 of her letters. Harvard University also has many of her poems and has many of her letters. And they have a special collection too, because she was sending a lot of her letters outwards to friends that lived in eastern Massachusetts. And so collectors and Harvard out there ended up being able to obtain many of those and also many of her poems. I believe only 8 or 9 of her poems were ever published during her lifetime. One beautiful poem that probably is a favorite of everyone is a poem, Because I Could Not Stop for Death, a gorgeous poem. But there's many, many others, some to do with flowers because she loved gardens. And so I invite you to go to the outside of her house, go to the inside of her house, go to not only the homestead but the Evergreen to see how her brother lived, Austin Dickinson, and see how the inside and outside of that home is. Remember that she babysat over there a lot. And the whole neighborhood is quite gorgeous, so I'm sure anything you do in the area will inspire you.
And thank you, Robert, for educating us on your tours and historical topics of your expertise. And of course, we want to thank our listeners as well. And you can check out a large selection of our other podcasts at his website. Thank you for tuning into our podcast, Canal Days, What Life is Like in the Industrial Connecticut River Valley of Massachusetts. I am your host, Carrie, and joining us today is Holyoke's very own local historian and creator of the historical tours of Greater Holyoke, Robert Como. He personally offers and leads public and private tours, as well as presentations of the historical sites within communities throughout the state of Mass. Currently, the communities he has chosen to focus on this year are Holyoke, Chicopee, South Hadley, and East Hampton, and also Granby and Amherst as well. His tours spotlight the local canals, reservoirs, cemeteries, and churches, as well as various parks, streets, and selected historical houses within each community. In today's episode, we'll be discussing the town of Amherst, Massachusetts. So, are there any locations within Amherst of historical significance?
There's many locations, of course, and it all depends upon which topic you want to take up. Of course, you can take up the topic of colleges, Amherst College, University of Massachusetts, and Hampshire College, or schools in general. You can take up the topics of railroads. It needs to be the Connecticut Valley Railroad going right through. On there, they put a bike trail. And then you can take up the topic of cemeteries, of course. And we're also begin talking about churches, so you can take that topic, and any denomination, major denomination is in here. And Amherst is very good at preserving their history. You can also take the topic of agriculture, or you can take up mountain ranges, because the Mount Holyoke Range passes right through Amherst. Or you can talk about parks. You can take up the topic of houses. They have gorgeous Victorian homes and a few colonial homes around. Or you can take up neighborhoods and how the neighborhoods have changed through time, and which neighborhoods are there, and why they grew up the way they are. Right? You can take up North Prospect Street and how that's changed, or North Amherst, how that's changed with the many years. You can take up history, of course, and where it came off of. So there's so much you can take up.
And the cemeteries throughout, have any left an imprint on their history?
Sure, and obviously most people would say right away, oh, the one that Emily Dickinson is buried at must be the most important. And you're right, because it's the oldest. It actually predates the existence of Amherst back when it was part of Hadley. So the West Cemetery is by far the most important of all. But there, in about 1809, they started up two more cemeteries, the North Cemetery and the South Amherst Cemetery. And those are now very old and are very, very important too, because they have the settlers that settle those regions. And then they have a garden-style cemetery, the Wildwood Cemetery, and that's incredibly important. Its existence is due to Emily Dickinson's brother, who was one of the two designers of it, and it's quite beautiful. And it's not only a garden-style cemetery, it's also designed such that it fits into nature itself, not that it creates a natural look like most garden-style cemeteries, but it is in nature. And that's a wonderful concept. And so, yes, the cemeteries are very important. And even this Catholic cemetery is outside of Amherst itself, it's in Hadley. But the church itself is built in Amherst.
And really quick before we continue with the rest of our interview, just to fill our listeners in, if you want to sign up for any of his tours or find out more information, you can check out his website at holyokecanaltour.org. And there you can find videos and podcasts of the stops on each of his tours, as well as photos and text of the historical sites throughout as well. And for other inquiries or for private tours, you can email him directly at bobcat4214B@yahoo.com. And his tours make for fun, educational, outdoor activities for families and group parties. So getting back to our interview, name some of the churches of Amherst that have influenced the town's history.
All right, there's a lot of churches around, that's for sure. And you could look at them from the point of view of which one's the most beautiful or most attended. One very interesting one is the Grace Episcopal Church, very close to Amherst College. And that one's in gorgeous church, and it's great condition. It's well worth a visit to Amherst to get to see that one. Of course, there's congregational churches around too. There's the first congregational church within the center of Amherst, and that one is very important. But there's also the North Amherst Congregational Church and the South Amherst Congregational Churches. All right, then there's a Unitarian Meeting House, there's a Baptist church. There is the former Zion Congregational Church, which is one of the African American churches inside of Amherst. Remember, Amherst is part of the Underground Railroad, and so a lot of African Americans settled here. and that one is now called the Hope Community Church. So yes, there's a lot of historical churches within Amherst.
And does Amherst preserve their history, in your opinion?
Yes, they have many churches around, many cemeteries around, and many homes around, but they preserve them all to a high degree. They do have the Community Preservation Act, and that helps greatly. And even the farming areas towards the north and south, they help preserve these wonderful neighborhoods in all those areas, including the Dickinson Historic District, which of course is where the homestead is, where Emily Dickinson herself grew up, and her brother's home is nearby. That is preserved to a wonderful degree, and Amherst College now owns both of those and makes sure that they have a lot of programs going on there and that their preservation standard is kept at a very high level. Now, Amherst is such that it likes to have all its homes preserved, and a lot of neighborhoods have beautiful streets and beautiful homes on them. The Sunset Local Historic District is one. The North Amherst Center Historic District is another. There, one of the highlights is Joseph Cowles' house. The Cushman Village Historic District is very nice. The East Village Historic District, where the East Street Elementary School is also very nice. I lived in that area for a couple of years. And probably the highlight of all, though, is going to be the Emily Dickinson home, and that is kept to an exceptional standard. But that being near the center, a lot of things have been kept to a high level. The former Jeffrey Amherst Inn, now called the Inn on Boltwood, is very nice. The Amherst Town Hall is very nice. Parks are gorgeous there. The Connecticut Valley Railroad Depot is kept to a very high standard. It is very old. So definitely Amherst is quite good at keeping up with historic preservation.
And thank you, Robert, for educating us on your tours and historical topics of your expertise. And of course, we want to thank our listeners for tuning in. And you can check out a large selection of our other podcasts on his website.